Hello and welcome to the very first highlights video of the Forza Horizon 4 Olympic Games event. So now, for this first video, it's going to be a little bit longer because we're going to need to go over an overview of our format for the Olympic Games. We're going to do a track layout so that you know exactly what the track is all about. We're going to do a recap of some of the previous days of qualifying, and we will get into the highlights for day 4, our current latest day of qualifying with the English qualifiers. But for all those qualifiers that we've already done and haven't been putting out videos for, we are going to recap those. So first, we're starting with an overview of the format. The Forza Horizon 4 Olympic Games are taking place in England, and with 11 nations competing, each nation gets to field up to 5 entries. Fewer entries if they don't have any, but up to 5 entries that are homologated to the S1 racing class level. And at first, there will be qualifying events where each nation has its own qualifier, where they will run a qualifying race on the Kensington Downs track, a custom-made track in Forza Horizon 4. And the times are compared, and whoever gets the best qualifying time is able to qualify for the championship event. So with 5 entries for each nation, they all go head-to-head in their own national qualifiers on each day, and the winners go to the championship and get to represent their fair nation in the Olympic Games. So one other thing to mention as well is that in the rules, cars that are all-wheel drive do not get to use traction control, but rear-wheel drive cars and front-wheel drive cars are allowed to use traction control, and that is in an effort to try and keep some of the times a bit more competitive between the two, as rear-wheel drive having some difficulty sometimes staying on the road and getting traction. So with that as the overview of our general format, we are now going to go to a track layout of the Kensington Downs track. Okay, and now for an overview of our track for qualifying Kensington Downs. Now this is a custom track in Forza Horizon 4 designed by yours truly to have a good mix of cornering and speed, although it is a little bit biased in the favor of speed because of our back straight. Now this will all make sense as we dive right into the layout and tracing out the track for our qualifying on the map, which unfortunately cannot be highlighted, but will be traced out here. So we start off first here on this straightaway, and this is our starting line. We go first all the way up here, and we have our first corner. We take a left and a slight rounding turn here, and a rounded curve powering through, and then we have our first 90-degree right, which is the Ashbrook Town corner, going all the way through this small town, powering around this large rolling corner until we make it to the bridge chicane. Now this is the spot where we have a tight left and a tight right turn going across the bridge over Derwent Reservoir until we make it here to our reservoir section of the track. Now this is a relatively straight, long, powerful section here along the reservoir, as the vehicle is going to have to try and keep as much power as possible down through this section. And this sweeping turn right here for the reservoir section is exactly where the vehicles are going to need to keep as much speed as possible on this turn. A bit too sharp though to be able to always power all the way through depending on the vehicle, so an interesting one to watch for there until we make it right here to our corner that goes into the forest section. So now we slow down, take this corner here, and now we're in the forest section with a few rounding turns, sweeping rounded turn right here, going all the way through, and a bit of a slowdown right here as we have a few corners that are a bit tight, right, going through all the way here and exiting out towards our Horizon Festival area. Now this is Horizon Festival corner number 1, which is a slight enough corner that needs a bit of a slowdown in order to keep the power on through this small straight section. And then we have our sharp Horizon Festival turn in which we power onto the back straight, going all the way down very slow and starting up again. For our back straight, we get a test of acceleration all the way down the straightaway of the back straight. But then we have this section, the S-curves right here, in which we have a right turn and we have a left turn. Very slight, but at such speeds as the top, as the straightaway, around 180, 190 to 200 miles per hour. Some vehicles not quite able to make it through this S-curve without slowing a little bit down. So a bit of a handling issue as a barrier of entry to this straightaway. Not exactly one long straight, but there you have the S-curves. And then this is the most powerful section where we power through out of the S-curve and down the long back straight here. As we go into about this section here, a downhill, which allows some of our vehicles to get a higher top speed. And then making it all the way down here to our 90-degree right turn into the final section of the track, the town corners, in which we go through a small straightaway, a rounded corner, and then we have our Broadway town corners, number 1, number 2, and number 3. Small corners, tight corners in which handling are going to be a serious factor, and then powering back off to the finish line somewhere around here. So that's our qualifying track, Kensington Downs, giving you a little bit of insight into our track. Okay, and finally we move on to a recap of our previous days of qualifying as quick as I possibly can make it, because there's so much that has gone on in days 1, 2, and 3, and we are currently at day 4 with the English qualifiers, but we've already seen the qualifying times for several of our nations. First of all, the entire list of nations involved are Australia, Denmark, England, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the Netherlands, South Korea, Sweden, and the United States. So these 11 nations are going to be competing head-to-head with one entrant each in the championship race. And so for qualifiers, our first day saw the Netherlands and Denmark showing off their cars, as they only each had one entry, meaning that their entry was immediately eligible for qualification into the championship race. So coming up first, and day 1 was our Dutch Donkervoort D8 GTO from 2013. Now this vehicle, an interesting vehicle for sure, as it is small, very light, only 1,585 pounds, but 382 horsepower, powers it to some serious handling and braking numbers, as you can see, but a bit low on the speed, meant that it put out a time of 3 minutes and 24 seconds, .131 on our track. Being the first time, we had no idea if this was any good or if it was terrible, but our Donkervoort D8 GTO in any case was making it to the championship race and representing the Netherlands very proudly. And then our second race was the Danish qualifier, which again only had one entry, the Zenvo ST1 from 2016. As you can see, a very expensive, over $1 million hypercar, capable of going upwards of 230 miles per hour, a little bit perhaps lower on the handling and braking, and a rear-wheel drive car competing virtually stock, as it is about an S1 class car on its own. So because of that, the rear-wheel drive, even with traction control, without the addition of racing tires, had a little bit of issues with traction, struggling to stay on the track, but it did put up an impressive time with those speed numbers at a 3:22.753, so almost a second and a half or 2 seconds faster than the Netherlands Donkervoort D8, and a very strong time going in through day 1. And then our final qualifier of day 1 was South Korea, in which we first saw the Hyundai Veloster N from 2019 competing against the Kia Stinger GT. Only 2 entries for South Korea, a head-to-head between Kia and Hyundai. And first we saw the Hyundai Veloster N going at it here, as you can see. 7.8 and 8.5 in the handling and braking. Considerable numbers and 7.8 speed. Decent numbers indeed. At 588 horsepower, it put up a reasonably good time of 3 minutes 23 seconds, .543. So as we can see, 22, 23, 24 seconds seeming to be the average so far in day 1, until we saw the Kia Stinger GT make its way around the track, the second of South Korea's 2 entrants. And now, as you can see, 8.0 handling and braking, pretty solid, and still 7.8 speed, a very good number, 719 horsepower, being able to power its way up to 215 miles per hour on the back straight, put up an amazing time of 3 minutes and 20 seconds, .542, dropping jaws across the world across day one, as it was able to beat all of the other contestants' times that day significantly by 3 or 4 seconds. So, very interesting times coming out from day one, and incredibly good stuff coming out from the Kia Stinger GT, holding the qualifying record at the end of day one. Then for day two, we saw the Swedish and Australian qualifiers. First, the Swedes, though, entering 3 Volvos as their only entrants. Many fans looking towards Koenigsegg to see if there would be a Koenigsegg entrant, but unfortunately they were not able to secure a vehicle that would have made it to the homologation target of S1 900, as most of them are too high into the S2 class, and the only S1 cars did not seem to be available for this qualifier. And so 3 Volvos going head to head: the 850R wagon from 1997, the 1983 242 Turbo Evolution, and the 2015 V60 Polestar. Now, first up going was the 1997 850R, which put up some solid numbers at 322.140. Very good time there, and very good overall. And then we saw the Volvo V60 Polestar going through. A little bit less speed on this one, however, than the though the numbers don't seem to show it, a little bit less speed here from the V60 Polestar, and it was only able to make a time of 322.347. Ultimately, at the very end, though, after having to shave many seconds off, so a 322.3 versus a 322.1, very, very close here between these two Volvos. And then we saw our third Volvo here, the 242 Turbo Evolution from 1983, our oldest competitor at the time, competing, and with slightly higher power numbers, it seemed, at 761 horsepower, putting the 242 Turbo into a pretty good top speed, and being able to come out with a 321.9, breaking into the 21 seconds, pretty solid time, and being able to secure its spot as the Swedish qualifier, representing the nation of Sweden in the championship series. A very good performance from the 242 Turbo, but again, not quite on the same level as the Kia Stinger GT that we had seen from day one at 20.4. Still at this time holding the record so far for the days of qualifying and the times. So then, at the end of day two's Swedish qualifier, we ended up seeing the Australian qualifier, a very, very interesting qualifier set with 4 different vehicles that was sure to be some serious fireworks. So first, we had ourselves the Holden Torana A9X from 1977. As you can see, a muscle car with a huge engine. And look at that, 962 horsepower, putting some serious power numbers, but from 1977 and being rear-wheel drive, wasn't able to utilize traction control and had a bit of a tough time keeping all of that power on the ground, so putting out a time of 3 minutes and 23 seconds, .179, still quite respectable, but just not quite on the level that we have seen for some of these strong competitors from other nations. Then, without further ado, we had the Holden HDT Commodore VK. Now, from 1985, this car, an amazing platform for upgrades, as we see nearly 1,200 horsepower crammed into a twin-turbo V12 engine that was a serious monster on the track, as we saw some incredible speed times at the speed stat there, 9.1, blasting it up to 222 miles per hour at the end of the back straight, a new record at the time over the Kia Stinger GT, and some very, very impressive numbers, and powering it through to a 320.601, very, very close to the Kia Stinger GT's time, and an incredible result that was sure to be difficult to beat. And then, after that, we had 2 Utes, very, very typical Australian vehicles here. Sports car chopped into a sort of truck called a Ute, And our first ute was the HSV Maloo, which looked quite strong in its numbers, very good all around, but unfortunately just didn't quite have the same amount of power that we were looking to see if it needed to catch the HDT Commodore, and ultimately ended up putting up a 323.696 at the bottom of the Australian qualifiers list, just slightly below the Holden Torana. And with that number, we ended up going to our final contestant, the Ford FPV Pursuit Ute, our second Ute in the Australian qualifier. And with a disappointing result for the HSV Maloo and such a strong number from the HDT Commodore, it wasn't looking very good for our FPV Ford Pursuit Ute in its times, as its speed numbers were not quite there. But with great handling and great speed and good acceleration, very good all around, the FPV managed to start shaving seconds off of its time, and looking at a monumental difference, it ended up climbing lap over lap until the very last lap of our very last contestant. The FPV Pursuit Ute managed to do the impossible and pull out a 320.502 compared to the HDT Commodore's 326.01, and putting it into the lead and representing the nation of Australia in the championship series. What an incredible qualifier that was. A lot of fireworks, a lot of passion from the Aussies. Definitely something that we're looking to see. And that one, 320.502, coming very close to the Stinger's 20.40, or 452 rather. Very close numbers, and each day qualifiers heating up even more and more. Incredible stuff. And finally, for a recap of Day 3, yesterday's qualifiers with France, the French qualifiers. France was able to field 5 different vehicles here, our first nation to field a full 5 entrants. And at first we saw our Citroën DS3 Racing here, the first vehicle to run in a front-wheel drive setup in the qualifying track. But as you can see here, not quite able with that front-wheel drive setup to make the homologation target of S1 900, only making it to about 866. So some pretty weak numbers all around for handling, acceleration, launch, braking. Decent numbers, although, in the power, torque, and weight. The Citroën racing team was hoping that they would be able to put out some decent numbers, but unfortunately the Citroën DS3 with that front-wheel drive setup, even with traction control, just did not have the speed and was clearly not on the proper level at only 866, and was putting out dismal times of 329.23, the worst we've seen so far in qualifying. Definitely a disappointing result for our modern hot hatch, the Citroën DS3, and the Citroën racing team as their only entrant into the French qualifiers. But with that, our other modern hot hatch from France was that of the Renault Megane R26R from 2008. Now this modern hot hatch, similar to the Citroën DS3, but after the luck of the draw of being able to go after the Citroën, the Renault team saw the disappointment that happened from the Citroën's DS3's front-wheel drive setup and decided to swap to an all-wheel drive setup with some more power perhaps, after watching the disappointment that happened with the DS3, and were able to scramble to get their vehicle ready with a beautiful homologation target of 900. And look at those numbers, very strong in acceleration and launch with the all-wheel drive, putting all the power to the ground, and 7.9 and 8.6 with handling and braking. Made this Renault Megane very fast in the corners, being able to power through corners at incredible speeds, and started throwing up ridiculous times that absolutely blew everyone away. The Renault Megane R26R ultimately ended up putting up a time of 319.337. That's right, a 19 into the teens, our first 319 of the qualifiers, and into the low 19s at that, .337. A really incredible time, and 10 whole seconds faster than the Citroën DS3. Something that was absolutely monumental yesterday in France's qualifier, and that in comparison to the previous leader, the Stinger GT, is over a second, 1.1 seconds faster than the Kia Stinger GT, and even though the Megane only had about a top speed of 205 on the back straight, it had such incredible speed around the corners that it was able to power through and carve through the Kensington Downs track and put up really strong numbers that we had not been able to see before. Really incredible stuff. Exhilarating and thrilling as it was. Then we saw another Renault perform, and that was the 1980 Renault 5 Turbo. And now these is one of our two older 1980s hot hatch legends from the Rally series, and being homologated to S1895 here on the street, the 1985 Turbo did do a similar job to the Renault Megane, but with the older powertrain and running a rear-wheel drive setup, even with traction control, still managed to have some difficulty in keeping the power onto the ground, and managed to put up still a respectable time of 323.347. Certainly a good time within qualification contention for any other nation, but in France, with the 319.337 from the Renault Megane, not nearly good enough. And then after that, we saw our other 1980s rally hot hatch, the 1984 Peugeot 205 T16, and this vehicle, having some stronger acceleration and top speed numbers than the Renault 5 Turbo, and an all-wheel drive setup, managed to power through some very impressive numbers and ended up looking a lot like the Renault Megane, but with an older platform that just had a little bit too many problems with handling. Still ultimately putting up a time of 320.185, a very strong number, again beating the Kia Stinger's GT's time by about 0.3 seconds. So really strong stuff, but ultimately, again, not able to catch the Goliath of the French qualifiers, the Renault Megane. But the final qualifier was a monster. All eyes were on the 1992 Bugatti EB110 Supersport, an absolute legend, and the most expensive car at the time to qualify, $1.7 million. Bugatti was really going for it here. Slightly modified with racing tires and increased performance. You can see here very strong acceleration launch, handling and braking very strong as well, and a speed at 8.9 put the EB110 Supersport at a potential top speed of over 230 or 240. But with the S-curve and the back straight, would it be able to perform and be able to take down the Goliath, the Megane 9 R26R at 319.337? Well, the Bugatti went on to the track and it wowed us all. It was powering through the track at numbers that we have not seen anywhere else. Incredible speed through every corner, especially on the back straight, as it powered through the S-curves at over 200 miles per hour and powered out onto the back straight at a top speed of 226 at times, a new record, beating the HDT Commodore, and ended up pulling out a very ridiculously amazing strong lap of 3:19.066, pulling it ahead of the mighty Renault Megane R26R, and an absolutely ridiculous time of 19.0. Very strong, and obviously the new qualifying leader by over a second, closer to a second and a half. So incredible stuff coming out from the French qualifier, as the Bugatti EB110 Supersport, definitely a contender for the championship gold medal, and definitely one to look out for as it qualifies for the championship. Alright, now with an overview of the format of our 11 nations competing in the Forza Horizon 4 Olympic Games Championship, our track layout from the Kensington Downs qualifying track, and a recap of the first 3 days of qualifying that we've missed so far, we hope that you will stay tuned, and we'll see you in the next video for Day 4, showcasing the highlight clips from the English qualifiers, and boy oh boy are there some serious times yet to come. Stay tuned, and we will see you next time.